Hello, everyone, and welcome to my class, The Flow of Writing. I want to share this with you. This is something that, I love this concept. It's something that I learned about a long time ago from a TED Talk, and I've applied it, and I continue to apply it in my writing. In fact, it's probably one of the number one, I guess, productivity and things that has helped me the most be able to, crank out as many books that I have over a decade now. Understanding flow and how to achieve that is, I think, critical for any author who really wants to make this process as enjoyable as possible, as well as productive as possible. I took a creative writing class, and my teacher's name was Mr. Jerry Hanna. And even though I was a history major, I took every creative writing class that I could because I wanted to keep practicing the craft. And one of the assignments we had was to write a short story. And I remember I had some general ideas of wanted to do, but the idea that came to me, and I remember it was a Saturday afternoon. I was living in a duplex with my wife in downtown San Jose, in kind of a sketchy neighborhood. And we had our bedroom, and then we had kind of a little office. It was kind of a 2-bedroom little duplex. And so I remember having my computer, and I remember like, okay, I have to write this short story. And it was due the next week. And so I sat down and started to write. And the idea that I had was I wanted a anthropomorphic frog, so a frog that could walk and talk and act human-ish. I wanted him to be a main character, and I named him Hickam Todd. And then I wanted him to find a fairy trapped in a magical lantern that would only be opened if a riddle was answered. I had no idea what the riddle was, but in my mind, I could kind of see the contrast between these two characters. And I started writing the story, which became known as The Wishing Lantern. I wrote that entire story in one sitting. I hadn't thought of even the riddle. I didn't even know what the riddle was going to be about, but I kind of thought about the punchline of the riddle of what I wanted to do, but I had no idea. I just started writing. And what happened to me that Saturday afternoon is, as I was writing, I lost track of time. And I was in the zone, that as I was just having the dialogue of these two characters was just coming to me. And they were so different. There were such contrasts that they were like writing themselves. And it was just fun. And I kind of wove it into, fantasy world and created the story. And then all of a sudden I got to the end. And I'm like, wow, I wrote this whole thing in one sitting. I had thought, before I started, that this might take me a couple of days to write the whole thing. But no, the whole thing I wrote in one sitting. I got it all figured out. And I went back and read it a couple of days later, made a couple of tweaks, but I'm like, I really like this story. A couple of days later, it was due. I read it one more time. I had my wife read it. She liked it. She thought the ending was very fun, very clever, had a twist, because that's what I like to do. I turned it in, and Mr. Hanna loved it, gave it an A+, and he told me, he says, I think you should get this thing published. And actually, because of his encouragement, I'm like, this is just a sign up for class. I pictured myself writing novels more than short stories, but let me give it a try. It ended up being my first publication. But all that aside, what really stood out to me about that afternoon was the kind of this mental state that I got into. This ability to just, like everything else, just blot it out. And I was just able to focus on the story. I couldn't hear what was going on in the other room. I couldn't hear traffic. I was in the zone. And that's what I call it. I want to be in the zone. What I didn't realize is actually I had entered a flow state. And it wasn't until I listened to the TED Talk later that I'm like, that's what it was. And what I figured out back with The Wishing Lantern is I can be a more effective writer if I can get into that flow state quicker, reliably, and be able to have those creative juices flowing and be able to come up and write the words faster than I normally would when I'm being distracted by other things. What is the flow state? And to understand that, let's understand the guy who coined the term. First of all, we got to learn how to pronounce his name. His name is Czikszentmihalyi. And I've practiced that a couple of times, so I know how to pronounce it. But even if you just Google, the flow state TED Talk, his name is going to come up, and his picture will come up, and he'll talk about that. And I remember listening to it and watching his TED Talk, that I'm like, that's what happens to me. Like when I'm writing, when I'm creating content, when I'm doing something like that, one of those creative endeavors, that's what comes to me. It's called a flow state. So there's kind of this 2-axis grid. One is your skill at something, and the other one is how challenging it is. So, to one side, if it's not skilled or not challenging, then you're going to be apathetic about something. So you see kind of that corner little slice. And so the more you go over where your skill is better, but the challenge is low, hey, that might be relaxing. Hey, I'm good at this, but it's not hard for me to do. It's relaxing for me. But if the challenge is really high and your skill is really low, that produces anxiety. That's not the ideal state that you want to be in. So what he talked about is all these different kind of vectors of where you want to be. And he kind of dubbed the sweet spot of where your skill is high and the challenge is high. Though that combination of those two things is what will put you into a flow state. So really what this class is about is how can you improve the odds of getting into a flow state? Here's two things, right? Just knowing what you know about flow now, and you haven't even listened to the TED Talk yet, right? Knowing what you know about flow, here's two immediate things that you can do. In order to increase the challenge, set a time limit for yourself. So artificially, nobody's making you do it. You do it to yourself. Set a time limit on when you're going to either write the book or how long you're going to write a chapter. Set an arbitrary, realistic constraint around yourself. That will increase the challenge. Guess what? Increasing challenges improves the odds of you going into a flow state, right? The other one, if you look at the other axis, is your skill. Well, set a goal to increase your skill, right? It can be a goal of, I'm going to write more words. Set a goal of, I am going to analyze so many books. Set a goal of, I'm going to attend so many writers' conferences or writer's block classes, right? I'm going to set a goal to improve my skill, right? Because if you do both of those vectors, guess what? You're going to get into a flow state faster and faster. So off the bat, those are two things that you have power over in order to be able to increase the odds of you getting into a flow state.